Hey there, in this video, we're going to look at a 12-week roadmap to go from a complete beginner to becoming an expert in Microsoft Azure Cloud. We're also going to look at the 60 plus hands-on lab that you should be doing to learn this with an actual implementation of that Microsoft Azure Cloud. Also look at the 12 or 10 plus projects that you should be doing. So you can write in your resume as an experience saying that you have done that. So when you go for interviews, you gain the employer believe and trust that you've actually done these things as well. And finally, all about certification, where what all certifications will be relevant to you based on the type of job roles that you're applying. Now, if you stay till end, I'm also going to share a three-step framework to get a $250K thousand plus jobs. Just copy and paste that and implement in your learning so that you can get jobs like this. And this is what I'm saying it with based on experience, my own experience, and hundreds and thousands of individuals like you who from complete beginner to use this three-step framework to get a good high-paying job. Like SJ, who not only her husband got a new job, but she almost doubled her salary as well. Or Shovik from US, again from who got a job as an enterprise architect in Bank of America. Or Krishna, who recently accepted a job offer as a Azure Cloud engineer job role. Or Kennedy in the UK, working as a senior technical advisor now after learning all these things. Hari from UK again got a job as a lead data engineer. And it's not those who are already working. There are also guys like Talu who was completely new or beginner to in now working on in Canada or someone like Meghna, in spite of having a career gap, and we have tons and tons of guys like from no coding to getting a job offer in Canada and hundreds and thousands of guys. So in fact, 45,000 plus individuals. This I'm talking about 2020 or end of 2023, 2024 as well. Now, if you're interested in this three-step framework, there will be a link below this video. Just go and copy paste on, or just book a call with my team after going through this video. And once you're clear to understand how you can get hold of this three-step framework as well as whatever we teach to a next level as well. And this is we cover where we say we take you from not being confident to super confident on Microsoft Azure Cloud, or you struggling to get interview calls and how to go from a no interview call to multiple interview calls. And once you start getting interview call from no job offer to help you in your mock interviews and so on to get. So look at the description below and we'll look and book a discovery call with my team to see how we can help you. The link will be in the description below. Now with that, let's look at these hands-on lab, the project work, as well as the certification you should do. And if you stay till hand, you don't need to wait for entire 12 weeks. If you already know or how you can get a quicker result, I'll give you a tip towards and will show you how you can prepare for a job like this, which is available, and you can shorten your learning curve or you get a job so that you get paid to learn and implement these things. So how you get that shortcut on based on the experience, I'll talk towards and about once I talk about these all hands-on labs as well. So with that, if you're new to the channel, very quickly about me, I have close to 2.5 decades of IT experience and more than 1.5 now, around 15 years in cloud. We have gone from working with some of the best clients here in the UK, right from WorldPay, Royal Bank of Scotland, Atradius, Pepperdine in US, Tucson Electric Power in US, or Toyota in Brussels, International Computing Cloud in Switzerland, and as far as Bank of Somalia, Bank of Somalia, as well as Saudi Railways are remotely working as well. And I've gone from earning less than $100 a day to now earning in excess of 425, 500, 600, 900, and now in excess of £1,000 a day here in the UK as well. So this is all coming from real experience as well. So with that, let's look at the actual implementation or actual thing that you should be doing and learning. So first, you're going to begin with basics in cloud as well as Microsoft Azure Cloud and the cloud. So for cloud, you will see a video somewhere here or there where I've covered another video on this channel about cloud for concepts, where we have SaaS, PaaS, IaaS model, which is cloud service model, deployment model, and so on. So make sure you watch that video, which I'll be linking to this video. So once you have understand the basic cloud concept, we are going to look at the actual cloud on Microsoft Azure Cloud. So let me walk you through in terms of this particular thing on what I mean by actual global infrastructure, because that will be relevant and important for you. Also the cloud tools, which are basically Cloud Portal, Cloud PowerShell, Azure CLI, ARM templates, Azure Bicep, and so on. And then Azure accounts, tags, policies, subscriptions. These are some of the things that you should be doing to begin with to have a good idea about, and then create a free account and do some labs. This is what we're going to cover the first. Assume it's a 12 week, and we are covering 1 or 2 days per week. So week one is all about the Azure basics and ways. So in that Azure basics, you probably will be looking on global infrastructure. Now, what I mean by global infrastructure is Azure has geography or regions, which is like maybe a US East, US West, UK, Asia, and within Asia, and so on. That's divided into further broken into availability zone, which is nothing but data centers where you have the actual creation of those resources. And those availability zones are further divided into the update domain and fault domain. Now, because of the conscious of this video, I've created another more details about global infrastructure on this link below. So check that link on each of these. Further reading, further documentation is available on our website. So have a look at that. But this is the global infrastructure. And what you need to do is, as I said, it's divided into regions. That region is further divided into availability zones. And then these availability zones are data centers connected by a low latency, high bandwidth pipe so that you deploy machines, databases, network or applications, active across within data centers or across regions as well. And there's a concept of update domain and fault domain you should be clear with in Microsoft Azure Cloud, because that will dictate based on your either you are an architect or you're architect, or you as an administrator will be setting up your infrastructure or the machines or databases, network, and so on, so that you meet a recovery time objective, RTO, and RPOs, which is SLAs, and that will dictate how do you put where. And that will also help you in understanding the high availability and disaster recovery setup that you'll be doing. And so that's something you should be familiar with, understand and begin with these concepts on availability zone, reasons, and update domain and fault domain. And once you've done that, you should also be familiar with the concept about resource. And resource in nothing but in Microsoft Azure Cloud is nothing but each unit that you or each actual artifact that you create. So virtual machine, network, storage, compute, all these things, or maybe create a Kubernetes cluster and so on. This is a resource collected into a resource collection into a resource group, which so that you can apply policies, you can control them in one single as one single activity, creation, deletion, management, moving, and a lot of other things you can do. So collection of resources, resource group, that will be created inside a subscription so that you can have a billing, alerts, and so on. And on top of that, you have a management group so you can manage these resources, apply the policies, and so on. A lot of other things you can do. So that's something you should also be familiar with. Also on here, you should also familiar with the tools that you can use. So which is nothing but your ARM templates, PowerShell, Azure Portal, Azure CLI, Biceps, Terraform, and so on. And if you want to know more about this, as I said, there is a link below each of these videos. Make sure that you refer. We'll have subsequent videos and the more detail about these topics on that particular respective sections. Apart from that, you should also be familiar with or setting up budgets and alerts, because what you don't want is for your clients to have something run which you unexpected bill you get. So budget and alerts, another things that you should be making yourself familiar with. Now, so in order to learn all these things, you can learn and implement these things even before interview or for a client. So Microsoft gives a free account that you can practice. Again, how to create a free account. I will highly recommend you, if you have not done, create a free account. The link will be there. Again, to create a free account, there'll be a video. We'll be linking again on this video or in the description to create a free account. And then make sure go and create that account and play with that environment on how does portal look like. This is what I've already done. This is a portal.azure.com. I've already created an account, trial account, so you can see how does it look like. And then make yourself familiar with Azure portal, where you have 3 dots, which you see here, which is where all the resources we call hamburger menu. This is where you will have all the resources on that will be working on. This is where you can do a quick search for any services that you create. There's a new service which came, which is Copilot, to help you AI on portal to give you some additional help on Microsoft portal. This is the CLI which I was talking about, Cloud Shell we call. Cloud Shell, or you can install a separate CLI which will be talking in later in future videos. So this is a Cloud Shell. This is where you see all the billing alerts, sorry, the notifications and so on. This is where you have all the settings, additional settings that you see. This is where you get help on this question mark. This is where you have the feedback or you talk, and this is where all your accounts, directories, and more details. I'm using a dummy email address to practice on this on my son's name here. So this is all you should be doing. Create a free account, go and make yourself comfortable with Azure portal, Cloud Shell, CLI, which are saying PowerShell, which have not discussed. But again, when you go and do the shell, on here you have two options. Either you can go for Bash, which is a normal shell, or PowerShell, that if you're familiar with Microsoft products. And then ARM templates, that again, it's based on JSON objects to create resources in Microsoft Azure Cloud. So when you begin with, the first thing you should be doing is some hands-on lab. You should be creating a free account. And then optionally, the free account is for 1 year, which is more than enough. But there are some limitations and restrictions on that. You may change that free account to pay-as-you-go subscription or different type of subscriptions that are available. Make sure you create billing, alert, budgets, and so on. And then you can increase the quota. There is a soft limit and there's a hard limit. So soft limit you can increase by going to the portal, and then hard limit you can still, there are some restrictions on that, but depending on what kind of a what kind of a client you are with Microsoft, you can increase those quotas as well. So that's something you should be doing and beginning with basics of Azure Basics. Now, this entire the presentation which I'm doing, you can download it by scanning. So what you can do is you can pick a phone, open the phone, and click on a camera in front of that and zoom in. You will see a QR code. Click on that QR code. That will open a WhatsApp group. So if you don't have a WhatsApp, I highly recommend you to install a WhatsApp on your phone and then open in WhatsApp and then send the message to me or to my team, and you will be able to download this guide, entire PDF, so that you don't need to you can simply download and click on those links and refer there. So that's first thing is about understanding the Azure basics and services. With that, we're going to move on to the day 2, which is still week 1. I'm assuming you're studying at least 2 days in a week, or you can pick in 1 day per week. I'm assuming 2 days per week. And this is where we'll be beginning with Azure Compute. Where compute, what that are, we're going to look at. So virtual machines, scale sets, auto scaling, web services, Azure functions, containers, Kubernetes, we'll talk about separately, but then there's a virtual desktop and do some hands-on related to that. So in terms of, if you look at the compute, what exactly is compute? Compute is nothing but your virtual machines, which is your CPU and memory. Those two things combined together so you can do some processing. So virtual machines, you have app services, which is you predefined a predefined application, which could be .NET, Java, Python, PHP, and so on. I'll explain you and I'll show it to you in a minute here. Then there's a container instance. I'll cover that as a separately, just from a completeness point of view. I've put in here containers and Kubernetes, but it's a big topic in itself. And then you also have the virtual desktop. So you might have seen you have a lot of infrastructure through which your developers, your administrators, they get a virtual desktop so that they can work on, rather than having an actual PC or machine on each person, they get virtual desktops or instead of virtual machines giving. So if you want to know more about compute services, the link in the description below that you see, or link on our screens that you see. So virtual machines, you can go and create a virtual machine of Windows and Linux and different flavors of Windows servers, or normal Windows 11 or maybe Windows Server 2000, whatever is the latest available. Similarly, different flavors of Linux you can create, and then not only just creating a machine, but when you're creating a machine, you're creating inside a network. What that network, we'll see that in a minute, but you should be familiar with network and so on, depending on the role you're playing. But then there is something called NSG's network security group, which is a firewall. So you open firewall depending on 80 or 443 for HTTPS traffic, or 3389 for RDP portal and so on from internet. So we'll talk about those, but you should be familiar with these virtual machines and creating of these virtual machines. Now, as I said, these are the hands-on lab we give it to you in our programs. So if you're interested, as I said, have a look at the description which I mentioned earlier to how you can get hold of all these things that we are talking about, I'm talking about here. Now, there's another concept of virtual machine scale set. What you want to do is on these virtual machines, as load increases, you should have the system automatically extend or create more virtual machines fronted by load balancer. And as the workload decreases, you should be able to downgrade, or these virtual machines, automatic virtual machines can be reduced so that you don't pay for that amount. So that you should be make sure that you perform some hands-on lab related to virtual machine scale sets of this auto scaling as well. There's also a concept of availability set you can read out so that you can place your virtual machine in different fault domain and availability domain accordingly so that you can get high availability when you're doing machines. You're doing high availability within availability set. So when you can create on that. So let me just simply show it to you on. So what you're going to do is here on the search, you're going to come onto the virtual machines. Click here, virtual machine. Let me close this particular part and say I'm creating a virtual machine here, Azure virtual machine on here. And this is where you're creating subscriptions, which I mentioned earlier. Subscription is nothing but for your billing part. Let me move myself here. And then you create a resource group. This is us talking about collection of resources. You put them to a resource group. You're getting a virtual machine name, in which region you're going to put it. This is where you select that is a scale set or availability set, these concepts. So make sure you make yourself familiar with these scales, these concepts as well. Now, another one which I mentioned about is a uh, app service or a web app. So again, we come here and say app services. So you click on app service here and you say, I'm going to go and create a web app. Now within app services, let me go back, sorry. So you can create a web app. You can create a static web app. You can also create a web application with a database or WordPress website. All those things you can do. So I'm creating, for example, a simple web app right now. And actually, I wanted to show it to you that the actual runtime stack. And this is where I was talking about. You don't need to create a machine and you don't need to create an or install underlying libraries or framework for that application. Like for example, here, .NET, Java, you can then select which kind of a Java version, what Node.js or PHP or Python you can select and install. So Microsoft will then manage everything. You just need what kind of a runtime stack that they're looking for and where you want to create that. So that's another web app you should be performing this lab. Again, more you can check on these links below here. Now, virtual desktops, as I said, desktops are running, virtualization desktops running on the cloud, and you can give it to each of your developer or administrator or whosoever needs a machine, you can give it on these machines as well. Now, there's another concept of functions, which is a serverless, which basically you don't need to manage any web application or anything. You simply create a code and run it as a serverless where you don't need to manage any virtual machines, etc. So make sure that you're familiar with functions as well. So I simply go and look at function apps, and then your developer will develop the function, or if you're a developer, you'll be developing that function and then deploying this on here, one of those things. So depending on what kind of a plan you want and where you want to run these functions, you can create that function. So make sure, and then these functions will be interacting with other services like Event Hub, Event Grid, Cosmos DB, Notification Hub, messaging queues, and so on. Again, a little bit more developer or architect related concepts you should be familiar with. So in compute, what you probably should be doing is creating a virtual machines or and installing operating systems like Windows or Linux. And then later part, when you understand the storage, you may be connecting a storage, additional storage like block storage or object storage, or not object, block storage or file storage services. Maybe installing a machine with Visual Studio Code or Python or other services. And then deploying scale sets or creation of web apps and on functions and so on. So you do some hands-on lab related to that particular part. Now that's compute. Then the bigger part is networking, and especially if you're going for an architect roles or going for more advanced multi-cloud, then this networking plays a big role. So you should be familiar with networking. Again, when I started my career, or especially first 10, 15 years before I entered into cloud, I was working as an architect, I was working as an administrator, but I never had networking concepts. So again, you don't need to be a networking guru. A basic networking is more than enough for you. And if you're going fast, maybe you pause this, slow me down. You can do it, all those things on this video playing here. So make sure you're familiar with the concepts about networking. Private IP, public IP, VNets, subnets, I'll show it to you. And there are firewalls within Microsoft Azure level, which is called as NSGs and ASGs, Network Security Group and Application Security Group. We'll see that route tables domain DNS service, the application, the firewalls, the best-in host, and you perform some hands-on lab related to that. So let me actually show it to you what this means. So this is an outer layer where you have the actual Microsoft Azure cloud, and that Microsoft Azure cloud has a VNet, which is a bigger network. Uh, uh, through which you get IP addresses. That IP addresses you assign it to a virtual machine or a load balancer or a databases or a containers and Kubernetes and so on. That network is broken down to smaller parts we call subnets. And within subnet, you create, for example, database tier or the application tier or a virtual machines. So you have a subnet, you have a database tier, you have an application tier, you have a web tier where you have a load balancer, etc. as well. And then you can create something called Bastion service, which I'll explain you later when we come to the Bastion. Make sure you're familiar with these concepts. And then you can configure each of these has a network security group, which is a subnet level that you're creating. And then you open some connections from internet if you want, depending on what your business use cases are, and you allow HTTP or HTTPS ports to be open, and then you open the connectivity with through NSGs and allow only the required connections on or open only the required ports that are required. And then on the bottom layer you see you configure the connectivity with on-premise like VPN or express route. We'll explain difference between VPN and express route you should be familiar with. Create gateways to connect. So this is a 30,000 foot view high level about networking you should be familiar with. So VNet and subnet you should be creating. There's more links around that. So if I go and create, by default there comes a network. When you're creating a virtual machine, it will let you create a network by default, but you can reuse an existing network. So here I'm creating a virtual network VNet and saying, sorry. So you click on create and you can create a network. Again, same thing. I'm creating inside a subscription and then put that network in a resource group. And then I'm going to select the name of the virtual network and in which region I'm going to create. And then I'm going to give this on here. I'm going to select my IP addresses, what all IP addresses I'm going to give it. So network. That further broken down to subnets. So when I'm creating a VNet, I can select how many subnets I create, and I can later add more subnets depending on the IP addresses that are available on this. Now, Bastion host is, think of it as a remote desktop, you as a interim place. Uh, so uh, so, uh, so this is another concept you should be knowing, and you should be doing some hands-on lab related to that, especially if you're an architect, administrator, or someone who's managing this cloud environments or DevOps engineer as well. So what you're going to do is you create a machine and all the connectivity from internet or from your office will hit to the best-in host, and then best-in host will then allow connections so that if something is being compromised, you're restricted to this. But again, here you're not opening up a RDP port, you're doing SSL, which is a HTTPS port, which is 443, you're connecting from best-in host. And from there, you open RDP or SSH securely on the backend VMs. Best-in host is important. You want to read more about it's given here. Also, you should know and do the peering of the network. So you have machines in one network, you have machine in second network, you have machine in third network. There's something called the hub and spoke model, which will you can cover later. So you might have an application one in one network, application two in second network, and then you want them to talk to each other. You'll be putting or configuring peering of that. So you should be making sure you're familiar with the peering of that connections as well. Now, this is an example of a hub spoke topology. Again, if you're an architect, administrator, DevOps engineer, you'll be working very aggressively on these things here. So you create a production network one, VNet 1, production network 2. You have a DevOps or non-production environment and non-production networks. Now, everything will be talking through this hub, which is a central network, so that my Bastion service, my firewalls, my gateways, routers, everything is connected to this. And this is where you can use Palo Alto or Cisco firewall and etc. on top of additionally what firewalls Microsoft provides. And this is where you go and connect to these machines. And then you can have a centralized monitoring service, centralized management service, and so on. So all these things are managed through this hub network, and all the connectivity to this Azure cloud will be going through hub. And these are different network talking to each other through hub as well. So it's a hub and spoke topology. Again, you build some, configure some hub and spoke topology. Then there is a firewall. Apart from NSGs and ASGs, which is a network security group and application security group, which we'll see a little bit later. You should also be knowing how to deploy the firewall. So Microsoft provides an additional firewall layer, which is layer 3 to layer 7 connectivity policies. You can control what's happening, and you can even inspect the uh, traffic packet by packet to see what's going and coming out. Depending on your requirement, you will be doing either layer 3 or layer 4 or layer 7 firewalls. So you can track and you can deny. There's something called a WAF, web application firewall. Again, configure and learn and implement those things. So your request is being allowed and accepted and rejected based on the if there is a traffic is coming from a good source, allow. If it's not coming from a good source, there are policies, predefined policies available. You can configure those. So Azure Firewall is another one important thing. So in terms of the basic networking, you should be creating the virtual networks, subnets, and then create a machines inside those on those network. And then it's talking about do the peering, see that machines in one network can talk to machine in second network. How do you allow the routing and so on? Create a best-in host. Configure best-in to the backend connectivity from the client to the best-in to the backend VMs or peering of these network. Define the firewall, configure the hub and spoke topologies and so on. These are important things. So that's my day 3 on networking. And again, you don't need to be complicated as I said towards and I'm going to go and give you a tip on and then how you can learn quickly instead of 12 weeks, maybe in 2-3 weeks, depending on your experience and knowledge. So once you have done this, then you also need to know the security at a network identity level. So this is where you define service endpoints. So each service, maybe my database service, my storage service, my VM service, or other services, each you can create an endpoint and you can secure that endpoint through that. There's also a service principal. Each of these can be accessed through a service principal. Those service principals can be stored in your Entra ID or Azure Active Directory or on-premise directory services, which we'll be talking about. Then you also have load balancing and connectivity, which we'll see in a minute. So you have load balancers. You have the different type of load balancing activities. You have a load balancer, application gateway, and traffic manager. What's the difference between these three? Maybe configure those. Also, there's a connectivity with on-premise, as I was talking about, VPN gateways and express route. What is the difference between those and then actually implementation of that? There's also a content delivery network, which is your Azure front door and so on. So let's look at what are the services, what you'll be doing on some hands-on lab related to that. So when you connect from your Azure network with your on-premise network, there are two ways to connect. You can connect through something called VPN, virtual private network, or there's something called express route, which is a dedicated pipe. Or you have a Microsoft Azure network talking to AWS network or Google network or Google Cloud network or Oracle Cloud network or other cloud networks. They can connect through VPN or that pipe I was talking about. So make sure that you're familiar with VPN and implement a VPN. And within VPN, there are two types of VPN you can do: point to site or site to site. Site to site is between Azure and your data centers in on-premise. Point to site is about cloud and a laptop on my PC connecting to that. So you can check more about VPN gateways and configurations on this link URL given below. So, and then you can perform these hands-on labs. These labs are very, very extensive labs. How you can get hold of? In the description, there's a call to book. You can book a call with my team, but make sure that you watch this video thoroughly, understand and enter the details on so they can see if you really, really want to take your Azure Cloud network, Azure Cloud knowledge to the next level and learn all these things quickly and get a high paying job. Check that link below. Now, VPN, the challenge with the VPN is that you're relying on the internet bandwidth, and bandwidth is not always bandwidth is comparatively less, and also you're relying on internet's bandwidth. Whereas express route, think of it as a dedicated pipe between you, your data center, and the Microsoft Azure cloud. So you get gigabytes of network traffic that can move. So especially if you have a lot of data traveling between on-premise and cloud, or if you're doing initial migrations, that comes handy. Or for big lot of data between, as I said, between on-premise and cloud, then you'll be using express route. So it's a dedicated pipe between on-premise and cloud. So express route, you should be making sure familiar with that. There's also concept of front door, which is a content delivery network, which will be having increasing the performance of your site or application by bringing the more frequently used content closer to the endpoint where these front doors are deployed. So make sure you do some hands-on lab about front door. But before we go, and actually I wanted to forget to show you. So if you go and search on VPN, and then you'll be doing connections on VPN virtual net. So this is where you'll go and saying express route connectivity and then normal VPN as a service virtual, and then you can create gateways and so on. Similarly, you come here and configure the front door. This is a front door and CDN profiles or policies for content delivery as well. So create some labs uh, about this content delivery network. Now, load balancers, there are three options you get, and this is where people get confused. Initially, first couple of months, I was confused which one I should pick. Is it a Azure load balancer? Is it a traffic manager or application gateway? These are the three options you get. So Azure load balancer is a layer 4 load balancing that only applicable for TCP and UDP level. Application gateway is a OSI model. We are talking about now networking concepts of layer 7 networking model, where you only work on HTTP, HTTPS level application gateway. And then you have Azure Traffic Manager, which is on DNS based, works on HTTP or TCP, IP, and other protocols, DNS based. So depending on what your requirement is, you'll be either putting load balancer, traffic manager, or application gateway. And this is where your architect, if you're an architect, this is what you'll be deciding and implementing. So make sure you're familiar with load balancer, traffic manager, and application gateway, and how do you do and differentiate between these two on that you need. So this is where you're actually implementing this. Now, actually, all three balances the load, but depending on the requirement, you might be picking one of these three. So as an architect, you should be knowing this, or administrator, you should know how to implement. So actually, let me go and show it to you. So I'll say now, for example, load balancer. So you search on load balancer. This is the load balancer. So when you're creating the load balancer, it's going to give you an option of what kind of a load balancer that you're seeing. So you click on create. Right now, there's no load balancer. And then you have, if you scroll down, uh, is it a public facing or internal load balancer? Is it regional or global? That's also another couple of things that you should be are familiar with. And then what the front end IP, the back end pools, which you'll see as once I do it. So this is a load balancer, which can be balancing the load between the virtual machines or VM scale set that we saw earlier. More about this on this link about load balancer. Something similar, traffic manager, as I saw earlier, the traffic manager is the DNS level or DNS based. So you'll be defining DNS, and based on that, you're going to go and create a traffic manager. So actually, so what's happening is mainly you have region 1 and region 2, or you have, for example, an application coming one application across multiple cloud. You have on AWS cloud and Azure cloud, you can put a traffic manager on front and saying based on the request, DNS based, you're forwarding it to, or within Microsoft Azure as well. So if I go and search for traffic manager, you simply go and click on traffic manager, and then you are creating the profiles and then forwarding the request on for Azure Traffic Manager. So you can click on create and play with this and create some backend profiles that will based on, for example, this is where the instance DNS names are, whatever xyz.trafficmanager.net, and then we'll have backend details and so on. So there is more additional things required for you to perform. And then there's the application gateway, which is based on, for example, one single URL. But if I say / images, go to this backend. / videos, go to this backend. / something something, go to another one as well. So this is where again you search for application gateway, and then you go and create the application gateways here and say create, and based on the URI which we see, the front end and the back end, the front end / whatever you want to do and so on names. So that's application gateway. And then there's a DNS, which is a domain name service. So for example, k2academy.com, forwarding it to the backend IP addresses. So DNS, domain name service resolving to an IP addresses. There's a private DNS you can configure within the load or within the account here. So we'll say DNS, and then DNS zones that will dictate and within that domain DNS zones, you'll be defining the routing and all those things that you'll be defining and converting them. Again, we can read out more about DNS, but make sure that you configure the DNS, which is quite heavily used and worked within internal network communications. So these are the three, which is the net load balancers, actual load balancer, traffic manager, and application gateway. And then comes the actual firewall at a Microsoft Azure cloud level. There are two type of different type firewall: network security group and application security group. There is a subtle difference between these two, but this is again a lot of common question in interview. Hey, which one you picked up and why? And based on that, you can pause this recording, or as I said, download this, which you can download this whole guide, which I think I've shared earlier, the code, QR code, put that into the phone and we'll do. And maybe I might put below the description or in the video under the description about this link so you can watch this and read more about. So um, both are doing controlling the traffic inbound and outbound, but one at an IP network interface card level and second is at the group of VMs or VM skill sets level. So here I'm saying I've created a machine and then I'm saying in network security group allowed, port number 80 is allowed, but 3389, which is the RDP port, is not allowed. And there's a management group where 80 is denied, but 3389, which is the RDP, is allowed, and so on. So I can configure. And then what I do is here, I create a group of machines and I'm saying that application ASG web and ASG web, I'm allowing web traffic, which is port number 80 on, and whatever application security group VMs, application security group has a ASG web, all those machines will allow that particular of traffic. So these two will be allowing web traffic. This is a logic, and that will be allow or deny based on the request. So HTTP, these are allowed, but HTTP on logic is denied. From here, from these two, I'm going out, I'm going to VM4, not allowed to go from these web applications, but I'm allowed for going from ASG logic web app. So these are the application security group you should be doing. Now there's a network service endpoints you can define for maybe an account, storage account. So here you see storage account. This is a storage account allow. So you can dictate who can access and who can't access. And from there also you can where you can go, what is allowed and so on. This can do. There's also a managed identity, and within that managed identity, there's a system assigned identity and a user assigned identity. These will be equally important or very important when you go for certificates, keys management, and so across from one service to another service, they're accessing it so that you can get hold of encryptions and permissions and so on. So make sure you're familiar with managed identity, especially the user assigned managed identity. That will be useful. So what you do, you do some hands-on lab related to the load balancers, the front door, the traffic manager, application gateway, DNS zones, network security endpoints, filter the traffic through network security group, application security group, and then secure storage using creating the service endpoints. So that's about this. As I said, take the photo if you want of this and you can download this. So take a picture like this, go to the scan and download this whole guide as well. And you can reach out to my team through that WhatsApp as well if you need further help on any of this. Now, that's about this. Next is about storage solution. So when we talk about storage, we'll talk about there are three types of storage, and these three types of storage collected in Microsoft Azure called storage account. So you create a storage account, and within that storage account you create type of storage, and then you probably are doing managed there within those. Let me explain all these things, and then you can create a redundancy replication across storage. There's a lifecycle management of storage, as well as securing the data on that storage using Key Vault and create some hands-on labs. So let's look at now storage. I was talking about there are three different types of storage. Typically you go block storage, where you write the data block by block. So inside a VM, VMs are using the block storage. The databases are using the block storage, the underlying operating system or the databases. Then you have file, which is network file share, where across multiple machines sharing the common file system, or you have a file system which is shared across on a network level basis, so files. And then you have object storage, which are your images, static file images, videos, backup, and so on. The cheapest is the object, the most expensive is file, and block is somewhere in the middle, as you see now here. And then they're accessed differently. Now, all these things in here, you have blob, which is your uh, the object storage. Blob is object storage. You have file, which is your file storage, and then you have disk, which is your block. And within that, there are subtype of data you can write, and there is a queue, which is JMS, and even queues and so on. You have queues. So you create a storage account, and then below that you create each of these. Now storage account, there are different type of storage account. There's a different redundancy, all those things. And so let me actually show it to you. When you're creating storage accounts, you're creating, this is where you're creating a storage account. Now in the storage account, sorry, I think I'm not restoring. So you can create, restore, do backup and restore. This whole lifecycle management on storage account. Now in storage account, there is something called as container concept. Don't mix that container with containers and Kubernetes. This is a different container that you see in a storage account. So you can do all, how do you protect the data? You can do the networking around this, where this storage account is accessible and so on. Uh, and what kind of a redundancy you're creating. So in redundancy, there are different type of redundancy available, which is a locally redundant within the data center, then zonal within a zone, or then this is a data center or geo redundant, and there's a durability based on these redundancies that are available. If you want to read more about storage, again, this is the link below that storage. So make sure you create a blob, which is a binary large object, object type, and then do a lifecycle management of these blobs. And then you can create a file share. So again, within that, if you see now here, I'm looking to look at blob. So there is a free services blob services, storage blobs, and this is where a storage account you'll be doing. And then similarly, file share. So you'll be creating file shares, and then first is creation of file system, and then you need to mount them across Windows or Linux by formatting those file systems as well. So this is where you will be going and creating the files. And then you can do based on Samba share or NFS share, NFS, and so on, you can do with the virtual machines. Then you have a disk, and those disk you can attach to a VM. So you might have seen in Windows or Linux machines, you have Windows, you have C drive, D drive, E drive. So there's a operating system disk, but then on top of that, you can do additional disks that you can attach. So you as an administrator will be adding disks and attaching them to the virtual machines and formatting them and so on. And then you can secure the data on those disks using Key Vault. So Key Vault will have store your keys for encryption, decryption. It will also key for your SSL certificate and a lot of those things. And as a developer, you might be administrator, you might be managing these key vaults, and then as a developer, you'll be storing the keys and then doing all the all connectivity, access, and all those lifecycle management about keys. So if you look at the vault, just search for vault and you'll see key vaults, and this is where you'll be creating, managing as an administrator. And then as a developer, you'll be leveraging those keys to protect data programmatically or through console as well. So there are some implementing and securing the data. You can also use these keys to encrypt a data in a database in a particular column, like for example, social security number or a credit card and so on. You can encrypt all those things. So there's a hands-on lab related to, we do very extensive hands-on labs on each of these. So you're creating a storage account, configuring the key vault, keys and secrets, and then managing the life cycle, and then using the keys to encrypt the data in a SQL database as well, and so on. So do some hands-on lab about storage account, blob, manage disk, which I mentioned earlier. That brings me to the next part, which is about containers and Kubernetes. Pay special attention to this containers and Kubernetes. Now, before I go and talk to you about containers and Kubernetes, let me first show you that if you just go and search for Azure Kubernetes Service or Kubernetes, you will see tons and tons of job in US, Canada, UK, India, Middle East, Singapore, whatever country you are, you'll see tons and tons of jobs related to Kubernetes. In fact, it's not like just Kubernetes, they're all over the Azure, but I just want to focus because we are in this topic about Microsoft Azure Cloud. Okay, so to give you some context about a little bit background to understand this whole thing, what you should be doing and why you should be doing. Traditionally, when I started my career back in 2000, we were deploying traditionally on the big machines like Solaris, HP Unix, Windows, Linux, big servers, one single server, all the applications hosted on those servers. Then in 2005 came and the VMware bought virtualization, And then virtualization is where you have one big machine, but broken down to multiple small parts through software, which you install operating system and then run applications on that. 2011, 12, 13 came, and then Docker started revolutionize the world with containers, where you run the containers in an easy to format, where each big application broken down to smaller parts, which is called as microservices. Or those microservices had been running on containers. And then in order to manage those containers, you need a container orchestration or container management tools like Kubernetes. So this is where the word containers and Kubernetes came. So in order for you to create those containers, you need an image through which you just simply point to that image and say spawn multiple copies of that, which is nothing but containers. So those images are stored in a registry, and an implementation of that registry on Microsoft Azure Cloud is Azure Container Registry that you see here. So make sure you're familiar with Azure Container Registry. Now, you can create independent containers and then manage within that in Microsoft Azure Cloud, which is called as Azure Container Instances. And then deploying Kubernetes cluster and managing the containers within that Azure Kubernetes cluster, or Kubernetes cluster is called as Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. So make yourself familiar with Azure Container Registry, Azure Container Instances, Azure Kubernetes Services, where you can go and create the containers on Microsoft Azure Cloud. You can read more about here, or you can go for say container, and then you'll be going in container apps or container instances. This is where you'll be creating a container instances, or you can create a container applications directly, and then run inside a container. So I say container instances, I can go and create a container instance, and it's quite easy to create container instances. And then this is where I'm going to look at the image. So I'm creating a hello world image, which is simple, or you can build your own container registry and point it here. So I'm running, it'll giving the network, it'll be doing the container host in actual container, and then I can access that containers to know more. Then, so make sure that you're familiar with implementing the container instances. So what you do is typically you as a developer or someone in your development team will be creating the images, and that images will be stored in a container registry. That container registry, from there, you can go and create the container instances as we saw earlier here. So similarly, you can deploy the Kubernetes cluster. And how do you create a Kubernetes cluster? Through multiple ways, like typically any Microsoft Azure resources you can create through CLI, command line interface, or PowerShell, or through Portal, or through ARM templates, or using Terraform and so on. So create Azure Kubernetes cluster, and then later you can configure the storage around that Kubernetes cluster. And storage, there's something called as persistent volume and that could be a dynamic volume, or it could be a static volumes. And within those volumes, we saw earlier static disks, block storage, or you can have a file share, NFS file share, you can configure those disks. So make sure that you are familiar with these concepts and can implement this if you want to work on Kubernetes cluster. Now, as I said at the start, at the end, I'm going to give a tip. So make sure that you watch this video till full, so you understand all of that. And then important thing is how you can shortcut. I'll be talking about that shortcut as well. Now, you also need to configure the networking, or at least familiar with understanding of the networking within the container or within the Azure Kubernetes service. So you have a network within which you're going to create a Kubernetes cluster. You then broke down that into subnets as we saw earlier. And then on that subnets, my Kubernetes cluster will have a concept of pod where my application runs. So pod will need some IP addresses. That IP addresses will be going from subnets. In front of those pods or application running on top of pod, you need probably a load balancer or ingress controller and so on. So you can configure load balancer or application gateway, which we saw earlier. You can also configure a firewall, etc. that we were looking to network. You can also integrate with Entra ID, which we'll be going to see, which is my Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which is integration with for my authentication, authorization policies, and so on. Role-based access control will be you can configure. You understand that as well. Now, this is a whole end-to-end implementation that we give you inside the program. And again, as I said at the start, if you need help, there's a link to description below in the description, and you can book a call with my team to see if you're right fit for the program or not to understand this. So this is where you have Azure Kubernetes cluster we're creating. This is where I have the front-end application and the back-end application. Back-end application where the actual application and front-end, which is ingress load balancers. and then I can have the common services which are being used. So I've created a Kubernetes cluster, but that Kubernetes cluster can then talk to my databases, my Cosmos DB, other databases, and then it can also integrate with Entra ID or Azure Active Directory. For monitoring purpose, Azure Monitor. For key vaults, for making sure that you have the data is encrypted both at rest and in transit and encryption keys. Now, this is where my Azure Container Registry to store that images, and that I can push and pull the images. So as a DevOps engineer, I'll be pushing the images from developer machine or my CI build onto the registry, and from there I'm going to Kubernetes cluster is going to pull that images from the container registry. I can use Helm, which is a package manager to deploy application, and then I can configure load balancers in front of that. So I can do the entire CI/CD for that. And there are multiple ways to deploy, but you as an administrator, you as an architect, you as a developer, you as a security engineer should be familiar with what all those things you should be doing. So this is where you're going to go and perform, like create a container registry. You can also implement container instances or create a cluster and then access it. Deploy SQL servers or create a SQL server on as a platform as a service with Azure Kubernetes service. You deploy the containerized applications, secure networking, storage, all those things you do in Kubernetes cluster as well. So that's containers and Kubernetes. Again, as I said, at the end, I'm going to talk about how you can take an example of a Kubernetes job, and then like that, you can use different job types, how you can learn all this, get a job quickly. That takes us to the next part, which is about Azure DevOps. Now, if you're getting tired of me listening, give a pause, go for a walk, come back, but make sure that what do you call, make it favorite or save that video so that you can come back on this video. So next is Azure DevOps CI/CD tools, and this is where again you will see tons and tons of jobs related to DevOps. If you go to the market, and a lot of these DevOps implementation needs to know Azure knowledge and Azure DevOps. Azure has its own DevOps pipeline, so you see tons of jobs about DevOps, and they're pretty good job paying jobs if you see now, if you see in the market. So uh, this is a typical entire DevOps on Microsoft Azure cloud, where you have Azure boards, which is to tell your stories and write the business use cases. From that boards, your business analyst will write the use cases, and then engineer will go or a developer will go and store that or write a code in a Visual Studio Code that you see. So you'll use Visual Studio Code as a developer, or maybe whatever tool they use, and then we'll store the code in a repository, which is kind of a Git-based repository as your repo. From there, your testers will do the test plan and create a testing, etc. You might also want to secure it with integrate with security plans and make sure that code, infrastructure, everything is secured. Then using Azure pipelines, which is CI or CD. There are two different type of pipelines which you're going to see that contains integration and delivery or deployment. And then you'll be deploying. It could be VM, it could be web app, it could be containers or Kubernetes, it could be databases and so on. And then you monitor and manage using application sites, monitor and other tools that you'll be seeing that. So that is the whole end-to-end DevOps lifecycle. Everything you can do within Microsoft Azure cloud. This is a CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous delivery or deployment. So what you have is, we saw earlier developer creating a code into code repository and going into Azure repo, which is a Git-based repository. From there, we're bringing the code from different developers, bringing into a source code, and then creating a deployable unit. It could be a ER file, which is an enterprise archive. It could be WAR web archive. It could be a Java-based .NET Python. It could be also a containers and Kubernetes image that we saw earlier. That image, when then my CD pipeline creates, it'll create an environment, which is maybe dev environment, test environment, QA environment, prod environment. And then the code is being picked up and deployed by the CD onto these and being tested and promoted to another environment. So that's a whole CI/CD you should be familiar with. In fact, we give you a whole project about, on the first part of that is we're going to use the Terraform and to create the resources, my resource group, my web app, my other applications infrastructure on that. Second part is going to be on where my Azure pipeline is taking the code from developer, creating a deployable unit, and then my which is a CI, and then in CD part, this my CD deployment or Azure pipeline CD part will be actually deploying the code on top of this infrastructure which is being built, and you can access. So you can see actual implementation of CI/CD and on using Terraform, as well as my Azure DevOps pipeline. So this is the whole thing which will be getting as a project inside the program that we mentioned at the start. So, so do some labs so can show in your resume as a project that you've done these projects as well. You can also do some Docker deployment so you have for example, a web app which is of type containers. So what you're doing is your developers will be deploying the code, doing a commit, and will go into the code repository where the build pipeline will go and create a container registry, will store that image into a container registry, and then my release pipeline will pick up that registry and deploy on a web app, on containerized web app that you see. So again, we give you a whole lab and project to work on this and things like that. So for DevOps, first thing is there is a separate DevOps portal. I think so you have a dev.azure.com, or I think on the similar lines, dev.azure Azure DevOps portal. So there should be again a link which or on my channel, other channel, K2 Academy channel, where we have a step-by-step instructions on Azure DevOps account you can create. But the one thing you're going to struggle is that when CI/CD pipeline runs, you need to enable parallelism, which means multiple pipelines can go in parallel. So that's where you to enable parallelism in your DevOps account. Create some service principles so that your application, because this CI pipeline or CD pipeline will be interfacing with different services like storage, networking, compute, databases, and containers and Kubernetes and so on. So it will be creating a service principle so you can go and talk to each others. And then you do version control of your code, get all those integrations with your Azure repo. You implement GitHub Actions, which is a CI/CD trigger points, the different ways to trigger. You can also know how to automate the infrastructure using Terraform. Terraform is an open source third-party tool where you can provision your Azure cloud instance infrastructure, entire infrastructure using Terraform, which is similar to Azure Biceps or Azure ARM templates and so on. Also, you need to know multi-container application. There is another concept on Kubernetes, which is more than one container within one container. So you have typically you deploy one container per application, but sometimes you run multiple containers based on the application requirement. So make sure you know how to deploy that as well. So this is about whole end-to-end about containers and Kubernetes, which probably is very, very detailed about containers and Kubernetes, and then DevOps part, containers, Kubernetes, as well as DevOps. You also need to do, we are covering Ansible, so infrastructure management, Ansible, do some labs about Ansible as well. So that's DevOps. Now, next part is about if you might have heard of a Microsoft Active Directory. If you worked on industry for even for 1 year or so, every time you log into a Windows machine, you log in through Microsoft Active Directory, which is or users groups roles policies. Something similar on Azure Cloud. Microsoft started with Azure AD, which is Azure Active Directory, which is now rebranded to Entra ID. So you know and configure Entra ID. So by default, this comes a Entra ID or a Active Directory on Microsoft Azure Cloud, but then you can create additional Entra users groups roles and then manage that users groups roles policies. You can even integrate, which is very common, integrate your Entra ID with on-premise Active Directory so that users groups roles can be synced across between on-premise and cloud. There's also called as privileged identity management, PIM, also users groups roles policies, and do some labs around that. So there's, as I said, there's a users groups roles policies, service principles, and then associated with that a tenant in Microsoft Azure account, and then you have the management groups that we saw at the start, or then that management group will be managing your different type of roles that are available for that. So make sure yourself familiar with that. Also, there is a external identity and internal identities and a lot of other services which is used in your role-based access control. So make sure you perform some hands-on lab related to the role-based access control. We give very, very extensive hands-on lab that you can get hold of. So make sure you perform some hands-on labs as well. Then there is a multi-factor authentication where again in now by default trial accounts also Microsoft has enabled. When you log in, you have to do another form of authentication, not just password, but also maybe a token, maybe SMS, maybe on authenticator app, some another code for that. So you enable multi-factor authentication both for Azure Cloud as well as for application if you're depending on the application requirement. There's also a conditional access, which means grant access or deny based on maybe a location, maybe a time, based on the application, maybe the user type, uh, depending on the risk, and so on. So as a security developer, security administrator, you should be also familiar with conditional access. And of course, Entra ID, which I mentioned about. Microsoft has a Microsoft AD, which is now Entra ID, to control access through the cloud. Maybe you can do SaaS application, PaaS application, or other third party or on-premise. All those things you can do through this on Active Directory. You sync your cloud Entra ID with on-premise Active Directory. There's something called the AD Connect you can use. So, and there are different methods. And if you're going for interview and you say that you've implemented that, there might be some interview questions around that. So check them out as well. So do a lab about integrating. So what you can do is if you don't have an on-premise Active Directory, you can create a machine on the cloud itself and promote that as an Microsoft Active Directory. So you have Active Directory on the cloud, but think of it as a on-premise world. And then you go and you already have a on-premise, sorry, Entra ID on cloud. Sync that Entra ID users and groups with this Active Directory so that you understand what are the options available of those integrations and how that integration works on Active Directory domain controller as well. So you perform some hands-on lab again, synchronization, create a Active Directory on and then promote and create a machine, a server, create an Active Directory, and then sync that Active Directory with Azure AD. Configure role-based access control. Maybe another thing which is very, very common is you log into the virtual machines through that a user in a Entra ID, which is typical users that you do. So hands-on lab around that. So that's my Active Directory. Then comes day 10, which is we are on week 5. And if you follow this, probably you can learn these very, very quickly. Logging, monitoring, and diagnostic, all those things, which as an administrator, which as a cloud engineer, you'll be doing very, very extensively. So then you have Azure Monitor, which what it does is all the different type of logs, which your application logs, operating system logs, Azure resources, subscription, tenant, custom sources, all the different sources can come into a store, log store, and then from there you use insights, visualization, and analyze, respond, and integrate on these things. So you do Azure Monitor. And then again you can read more about this on this URL. So again, coming here, Monitor, you look at Azure Monitor. This is where you'll be configuring this Monitor log analytics application inside. This was talking about. So you have application insights, container insights, VM insights, all the insights as well. And then you have alerts, metrics, all those things that you need. I forgot about Entra ID to mention earlier. So this is where you can create and manage Entra ID and sync and all those things. So by default, there's an Entra ID. So if you see now, in fact, default directory, this is talking about there's a default directory comes, which is, and you can create more additional directories, which is, and yeah. So I think DevOps, I've already mentioned. There is a separate portal for dev.azure.com or dev.azure. I think it's a Azure DevOps portal. So you can search it out and probably will add some additional links on here. So you do monitoring. Then you also have the trusted advisor, which is like basically giving you the guidance based on your setup you're doing for reliability, cost optimization, operational excellence, security, performance. These are different pillars of a best practices on Azure cloud. So advisor will give you based on the setup you have, can give some recommendations on that. So again, go here and advisor. So this is where you go and access this advisor on for various recommendations for costing point of view. This is a trial version, so you don't see much about here right now, but it'll give you all these based on a score, and then you can improve those. Very good for architects and administrators. Then you have service health, which will tell you the health of a particular service, what's happening. So again, search for health, and this is where you get service health. Then you also have alerts. This is where, let's suppose you set some thresholds and say, if my disk storage goes 80% above, do this, or CPU hits this certain alert. If my pricing or costing goes above, set this alerts. So you go and pick that alerts as well. And then the application performance management, which application insight. So you can go and configure application insights. So I'll say insights, I'll search for insights, and you can configure the application insights. Application side. This is where you do the performance of what is the time in which your applications respond. So you can create all those things. mainly for monitoring and management point of view. So you should be doing some hands-on lab of application side. Then there is a Microsoft Defender for making security. So there's a cloud native application to protect your entire cloud with all the policies governed and given, so that for any cyber attack or any attack on your cloud environment, and it'll give you the ratings on that. So you can make sure that you configure or familiar with implementing this part as well. So Defender is a service which is available. So if I say Defender, and then Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and there's another Defender which I'm not going right now, but especially if you're working on security or an architect, make yourself familiar with this Microsoft Defender. We in fact give you some labs about Microsoft Defender. So what you need to do, you do application monitoring, you have log monitoring, you have network watcher, you have Defender. There's a whole thing to about monitoring the network, because a lot of issues troubleshooting comes within network firewall, routing, and so on. So there's a logging and monitoring available for you. And once you've done that, then you have the PowerShell, Cloud Shell, CLI, the tools that you should be making sure you're familiar with. So as I said earlier, CLI, command line interface, familiar with how do you create and manage resources through command line. Also, there's a PowerShell. If you're familiar with Microsoft applications, PowerShell available. You can install these tools on a Windows-based desktop, or you can do it directly from the cloud console itself as well. Then there's a ARM template, as I said at the start as well. And then, so you can create some operations through, in automation, you'll be using some of these things. We're creating resource group, creating machines, creating network storage, all through command line as well. So do some labs around this part. That basically covers this. Then comes my more on about a developer related services. When I'm building web application, if you're a developer, if you're an architect, if you're a DevOps engineer working mainly on developer side, then you might be want to make yourself familiar with web apps. How do you build web applications on platform as a service, which we some of you probably might also want to create multi-tier applications or solutions on that, probably service bus. Again, you don't need to do all of them. Again, based on a role, some are more important and critical than others, but if you know these things, you have much better chances to clear interview. You can say you have done these things as well. Um, or you get a job, you learn key important points, and then you do these things on the job and learn and implement. So you do, how do you message? So there's a message senders, there's a queue, and then all the subscribers to this message can consume these messages or service applications. So service bus. There's also a content delivery network. How do you configure CDN in your application as a developer or as an administrator? So implement Azure CDN as well. Then functions as a developer functions, as we saw earlier as well. So do these some hands-on lab related to the developer. If you're a developer, I would highly recommend you do these labs about a developer. And then comes the high availability and disaster recovery, especially if you're an architect, very, very pay special attention to this. So as I said at the start, you should be making familiar with global infrastructure where update domain, fault domain, availability zones, and regions. So there's something called as region pairs. So Microsoft had designed a pairing of the regions. So if you're doing high availability across regions or disaster recovery across region, make sure you configure through region pairs, which is like Microsoft paired those regions. So what that region pair is, understand? So for example, in Asia Pacific, there's a East Asia and a Southeast Asia. In China, there is China North, China East. If it's in Canada, Canada Central and Canada East. So you're creating one, if you're pairing the two regions, you do across these two regions and so on, so that you get better bandwidth. Similarly, in UK, you're UK West and UK South. So pair for geographies for high availability and disaster recovery. Again, make sure you're clear with the concept about update domain and fault domain. It'll be relevant when you're deploying application within a high availability for high availability. So again, without going too much into availability domain and another thing is availability set and availability zones, which are important for you. And my fault domain, update domain are also tied to each other. So what these are, make yourself pause this recording. As I said, the links that I've given, maybe download that if you have not yet done so, or reminding you again to download that at the end of this video. So then once you have understand the basic underlying concepts, then you go and configure high availability for web apps. So in web apps, you have, for example, within different subnets, high availability web app 1, and then behind that you have APIs, high availability for web app, but then you also have private API points, application programming interface or functions, multiple points. So load balancer in front and then going to within that application. And then you have a high ability within across ability zone or across regions and so on. And then integrate the Active Directory or load balancers or databases and so on into the firewalls. And you're, as an architect, you'll be defining for web apps. Similarly, you're going to do multi-region deployment. So you have one region, you can do, depending on the type of application, you can do active-active or active-passive. So for example, in this case, from a browser, I'm doing the traffic manager. And the traffic manager, as we saw earlier, based on the DNS, it'll be forwarding requests to either West US 2 or on to the East US. And then from here, they're going to the, in their own route from here, again, app gateway, from there to firewall, to my web tier, database tier, and application tier, and so on. And then active, you can do it on active-active or active-passive, depending on the type of databases or type of applications you have. This is an example of high availability and DR for a web application, web-based application across. You have high availability within a region, active-active, but then you also do a DR site across a separate region. And then you can also have, depending on availability set, you get 99.95% SLA. If you're doing availability zones, you're getting 99.99% SLA. So depending on what kind of a SLA you want, this is what you're going to talk to your business users. If you're an architect, you'll be sit down with business users and say, hey, what is your recovery time objective? Hey, what's your recovery point objective? And you'll be defining those things. Similarly, if you're doing databases, how do you do the high availability of databases across zones, across regions, depending on, again, what is your availability, and deploy highly available databases across and so on. Similarly, you're doing Kubernetes, high availability for Kubernetes cluster and across um, active-active or active-passive disaster. There are multiple options based on the networking that you pick on. So make sure you yourself become familiar, because when you're designing those things, that's when these deployments will come into handy. Also, there's something called as Azure Stack Hub, which is instead of doing the cloud on Microsoft Azure cloud, you can create your own private cloud, which is everything on your in your data center, but the same feature of cloud. That's called as Azure Stack Hub. So you're deploying that. But then how do you do Stack Hub? But across within your data centers using all the same features as Microsoft Azure Cloud, but active-active or active-passive and so on, deploying traffic manager, container registry, all those things. So HNDR, uh, if your client has Azure Stack Hub and so on. So this is whole high availability disaster recovery. And that brings the last and final part about migration. And that's deep. You need to learn if you really want a 250K plus job or good job. Again, you don't need to learn all of them to begin with. Enough for you to clear the interview, and then you can learn on the job, which I'm going to give a tip soon. So this is a migration. Again, there are 7R migration. When you're going for interviews, this is a very basic thing, but at least you should know, especially make yourself familiar with rehost or relocate, replatform or refactor. These other three are simple and easy to understand. But these understand the concept. There's something called as Azure Migrate, which give the whole process about migration to cloud, right from deciding where you're doing a discovery and then building a business use case to migrate. And then you create a plan where you bring whatever you have discovered, how do you plan that migration, and the actual execution of that migration. You might be doing multiple iterations, but then uh, that plan, actual implementation or testing of the some part, and then actual migration. And this is where the two things will come. Network will play a big role, whether it's you're doing the data transfer over the network or through disks and so on, which we'll see in a minute. So there are migration options available depending on the time of applications you have. So you might be having databases on virtual machines. You might be application on virtual machines. You might be having web servers on virtual machines. You might be having file servers. So for databases, you'll be using data migration service. For VMs, you'll be having the complete VM migration service. For files, you have a file migration service and you're deploying and migrating. So migration options. You also have Azure Migrate service. You have Azure Site recovery service, and you have a database migration service depending on the type of migrations. So make sure migration is a big topic in itself. You do understand. There's also a recovery service vault feature to recover your virtual machines available. Also, as I said, you can you need data to be migrated from on-premise to cloud. So you can use data boxes, which is store terabytes of data or petabytes of data in a disk, or big uh, depending on the type of boxes, you put in a data box and transfer. Or you can use the express route, which we saw earlier, have a dedicated bigger pipe to transfer the data over the internet, or that dedicated pipe. So do some hands-on lab related to the migration part as well. So that's the whole migration, whole 12-week roadmap in terms of just doing this. And then do some projects. And I'm going to go project. I'm going to go fast on those projects. Anyway, I'm going fast on this. We've been almost now more than 1 hour now, 1 hour 15 minutes or so. So I'm going to go on to this actual project. Again, you don't need to do all of them, but depending on the job description, you might want to do one or two to begin with, and then you add more and more project work. So these are the entire 12 or 13 projects we give, and but pick or you can bring your own projects as well. So beginning with deploying a 3-tier architecture. You might, if this is how it started, we had a database tier, you have an application tier, you have a web tier, and you have a load balancers and firewalls in between. So do the same setup, but on Microsoft Azure Cloud, you can have active or active passive databases and databases. So create a 3-tier architecture so that you understand the full picture about deploying a database tier, application tier, and a web tier, load balancers and firewalls, and so on. Then maybe if the job demands or the work demands more in a containerization, so you can do the containerization. So this is again, as I said, is create a Java application. So you can show in your resume if you're a developer, if you're an administrator, and the work or the job demands about containerizations. So do this project on deploying a Java application. Now, CI/CD, definitely if it's a DevOps project, definitely understanding CI/CD. So do a project on CI/CD where you go and take a Terraform to provision the underlying infrastructure, and then use Azure DevOps to deploy the application on top of that CI and CD implementation. So this is a project that we mentioned earlier. Do this end to end. You can also create, we'll give you the entire Kubernetes cluster code on Terraform. Everything basically you'll be getting hold of, so you can implement this thing. You can also deploy multi-container applications, so where you have more than one container. So this is the architecture where you have the backend Azure Kubernetes service. In that Kubernetes service, you're doing multi-container pods. That's the difference. And then you're defining load balancers. You're creating a registry, deploying the images. So first is CD. You're automating this Kubernetes cluster deployment infrastructure build. Then you're taking the code through CI, you're putting into code registry and then deploying this on, and you're also using DevOps pipeline. You're creating a SQL databases and then deploying the code on SQL databases if required. And then whole thing about CI/CD. If you're using DevOps, job demands DevOps, do this project about DevOps as well. Now, migration, I've already mentioned migrate VMware VM. So what you're going to do is we're going to create some machines, VMs and applications, and then migrate that in one region, acting as an on-premise, and then to cloud on another region. So do that migrations as well. You can also try to do migration from one region to another region for DR and failover. So that's another project we probably will be keen on doing that. Enter ID, I've already mentioned about syncing the AD on-premise to cloud. This is a big topic, especially if you're working, if the project demands integration of the Active Directory, which is very common if you're implementing. So do that project. Or contains the application using a container application on Kubernetes cluster, or deploying a Netflix-based application, but integrating with SonarQube security and so on. So Netflix type application, you can say that you've deployed that application on the cloud, so you understand entire Kubernetes cluster on that. And then the VPN, I was talking about site-to-site or point-to-site VPNs connectivity. So you can see actually connecting the VPN from your laptop to the Microsoft Azure cloud, and the data is encrypted through the VPN. So site-to-site or point-to-site integrations. Or you can create a website using Azure WordPress to hosting. So our entire K2 Academy is running on WordPress. WordPress you can run on Microsoft Azure Cloud. So you have a SQL database. It needs a database, a relational database. We are going to use MySQL, and WordPress hosting on Azure network, and then configuring a CDN in front so you can see the actual implementation of that, the whole things that we've learned. Or you can have your projects on Microsoft Azure storage. So this is a static data, static website running on where I'm having a blob on my projects are stored here, and creating a storage account with a CDN in front. This probably is a very for last two are quite basic things, but that will give you clarity about end-to-end implementations on that. So as I said, if you want this guide, just scan this code and the whole guide and links, all those things will be getting emailed to you. Now, I'm going to go brief about this certification, but maybe in the next video, I'm going to go deeper onto these certifications. When you go for certification, first my humble request is don't go for all the certifications. Just one is good to begin with, so you can write in a resume, but then do it on the job, or your focus should be 100% on getting job. Once you have a job, then you can perform more and more certifications. So begin with AZ 900. Dotted line means you don't need to wait, or you can directly go for any exam. You can go for 900, 104, 204, or 500. So this is administrator, this is developer, this is security. But for you to be an architect, you need to go for at least 104. For DevOps, you can either go for developer, which is AZ204, or administrator 104. Now, I'm not going to go deeper into here. As I said, I'm going to go create a separate videos. But AZ900, you can check out by link below, ketonacademy.com/AZ911 to more about this certification. There are three main topics that you get, and exam weightage wise. We give you tons and tons of sample exam questions. If you're part of the program, you'll be getting this part of the program, sample exam questions, so that there's no guessings. You can clear the exams as well. So we have tons and tons of guys who've cleared the certifications on AZ900. Just a handful of them here. Dinesh here. This is Pradeep. This is here Yao, and so on. Then you go for Azure Administrator AZ104. Again, there are 5 topics, right from identity governance to storage to compute and networking and resources. Check the link to know more about this certification. Again, we have tons of guys who have cleared the certification as well. So it's so a lot of guys, Ajmal, Piyush, Raja, Manish, Radha, a lot of others here, Prem, and then there is a AZ204 developer certification. Again, AZ500, check the link to know more about, because I'm going to go deeper into each of these and we'll create separate videos on in future. AZ400 for DevOps, and then finally, as I said, tons of guys who have cleared the certification in DevOps. And then final, as your solution architect, AZ305 as well. Shridevi, Rikin, Deepak, guys cleared the certification. Brian, Mohammed, Shridevi, and so on. Okay, and then again, clear the certification. Tons of guys who've done solution architect as well. So with that, we're going to do the final wrap up, and then I'll give you the tip part, which is the tip is about how you can get hold of these jobs. You don't need to wait for 12 weeks. People have done quicker. So one thing which happens is that when I say you can get a 250K plus job, I'm earning in excess of £1,000 for a number of years now. I know a lot of other friends are done. So you can achieve that. Depending on where you are, you may not be able to go directly to 250K, but you can take some steps. If you're already working good, you can jump on that kind of a salary as well. I'll tell you, this is a 3-step framework when we talk about that people can get 250K job. One objection I get is, hey, I'm not confident. So how you become confident is from no confidence to confident to apply the project-based learning, the hands-on lab, the project which we saw, understanding, and then do 1 or 2 relevant certification. But the second question I get is, once they get confidence, they start applying. I'm applying for the interviews, but not getting interview call. And that is where we again give you 2 things which will help you. One is ATS compliant resume, which is application tracking system, and then optimized LinkedIn. So what happens is your resume should be optimized so that before it goes to the human being, it should go through a system, and that ranks based on the keywords or job description. It should align to the job description, and if it's good enough, then I'll go to the interview, physical human being. So make sure that your resume should be first of all, each job description deserves a separate resume. You're not faking anything, you're not lying anything, but writing about whatever is given the job description on the at least first page or first 2 pages should have everything what an employer is asking, and make yourself promise that you're going to learn when you're preparing. So write down everything, but then go and apply, but learn the project base, which I'm going to show you in a minute how I do it and how the guys who get result quickly do it as well. Remove all the unnecessary clutter. Remove things that are not relevant and important on that. If you are part of our program, we give you GPTs so that you get tailor your resume inside. And again, if you need our help, there'll be link description below this video. Book a call with my team, if you have any questions otherwise, and to see how we can help you. So you get all the GPTs, you get all the prompts, but then also a human being who's reviewing your resume. We give a weekly resume clinic where you can bring your resumes, and we guidance, help and suggest you the changes as well. And this is what guys like you have said, Amol, updating my resume and preparing for the interview questions tailored to the job description um, made me feel well prepared, given the motivation to apply. And I'm refining my experience to align with the potential roles. I'm more enthusiastic, optimistic for applying for new opportunities. My profile has been shortlisted for 2 organizations. So imagine no interview calls to weekly basis, 2 or 3 shortlisted interviews for interviews as well. So that's number one. Number two, is that you should be also optimizing your LinkedIn profile, especially the headline, experience, recommendation, and certification and project. These 4 or 5 things are very, very important. Your, when someone look at your LinkedIn, because which is quite common, once they select your resume, they will go and look at your LinkedIn. So make sure that your LinkedIn also speaks pretty nice. So for example, some certificates if you have done. If not, write down Microsoft Azure or multi-cloud if you're going for, write down those points as well. And we give the entire training about LinkedIn preparation. So in that LinkedIn, you follow this training, and then also whatever you're learning, write down as an implementation, not write down as that you're learning, but write down that you're implementing for your clients. And that implementation, if you do both the things, which is updating your LinkedIn profile as well as writing on maybe once or twice in a week or maybe once in a month, uh, but actual implementation, what you've learned in. If you do that, these are the kind of results you're going to get. Like Michael, I did my homework, updated my LinkedIn profile. As soon as I did that, I got tons of emails for job prospect. Another one here, here from Prasad, got a call from companies on after changing my LinkedIn and resume. TCS and Full Stack are now offering me a $250K job. Need help on interview preparation, like that you're getting. Another one here, Ronnie, and saying that although I've not yet secured a job, I feel more confident in my interview skills. The guidance have helped me to approach my opportunities with a clear strategy. Mock interviews, my resume. Hopeful that continued effort, I'll land a role soon. So these are kind of a confidence you will get once you do that. Especially the mock interviews has been especially helpful in refining my approach as well. So once you start getting interview call, and final is about final job. Final is no job offer to multiple job offers, and that is where you do through mock interviews, and within mock interviews you do tech interviews and the behavioral interview. So this is where you go and do technical queries, scenario-based questions, conceptual questions, practical questions, behavioral questions, case studies, what you've done in actual. So based on the job description, we can give you the sample exam questions on what you can expect in the interview. Of course, it's not going to be 100%, but at least you get an idea about and how to prepare, how to answer those questions. So take an example of here migration. The question might be, we're migrating from on-premise to Azure cloud. What are the key considerations we should be considering, or what are the challenges you encountered in past when you were migrating, and so on. So prepare for those mock interviews. There's also a star format. We recommend you to follow the star format method to for clear the interviews. Again, these are results like that. Adnan, I cracked my interview, Azure interview, with the urgency of current job redundancy. He was made redundant, and imagine you were made redundant and you got a job with Adnan here in the UK. Daniel, again, um, all the necessary resources in securing job or obtaining the certifications, I highly recommend for. Shajim, again, he changed his career to now working on Azure Administrator and Shajim, based in India. Again, Pradeep, following this 3-step framework, especially the mock interviews and the resume and LinkedIn, I've cleared my first round of engineering, director of engineering, Pradeep here. So give you this entire thing which I mentioned, all the labs, the project work, the theory concepts, but on top of that, Terraform for Azure, Jenkins, CI/CD, of course, Azure DevOps, Microsoft Azure, but Kubernetes on AKS, DevOps Foundation, Docker, Git, and then interview preparation, LinkedIn, on-job resume. As I said, this is tried and tested. Check again, Anthony finally secured a job in Azure migration role, again based in Singapore here. Vaishali, she was already working, but I think she lost a job, or I think she was about to be made redundant. I was able to excel in multiple interviews. Remarkably, I landed a desired job within under 30 days as well. So based in, again in India. So again, These guys were good, but we made a little bit hand holding and shaping them as well. So with that, I'm going to go to the final part that you don't need to spend 12 weeks to or 8 to 12 weeks to learn all these things. How you can do get jobs quickly. This is exactly what I've been using for last 10, 15, 20 years on getting the results quickly because I work as a freelancer, as a contractor, and it gives me tons of money and gives me a lot of freedom. So taking the imperfect action. People get stuck and say, I need to learn everything. Yes, eventually you have to learn everything, but not on day one or not on day 12 or day 13 or day 20, day 30. You can learn it on the job. You can get paid to job the job as well. So imperfect action better than perfect inaction. So take an example of you get a job like this, which is the job description, which says this is a job where they're asking for Azure Kubernetes service, they're asking cloud platform engineer, they're asking about security, SecOps, and majority if you see now is a 100K. This is in the UK, 100K plus job on, and again, there are a lot of other high paid jobs as well, 700, 750 pounds a day. Similarly in US and Canada and other places as well. So what you need to do is if you job like this, make sure that you become an expert in Kubernetes. So understand ACR, ACI, AKS, which I mentioned earlier. Create container instances, create a container registry, uh, deploy the registry, uh, your application inside or your code logic or the image inside the registry, and then play with creating Kubernetes cluster, deploying, create some instance of cluster, play, see how it works, and then create a storage, uh, file storage, and the disk storage, which I mentioned. Create some application and use this storage claims, integrate with the Active Directory, configure networking, HNDR, and then do one or two projects. Depending on the job description, you can also see what you're getting. So we give you more additional projects. You can bring your own projects as well. And once this is done, then go and prepare a resume using the GPT that I mentioned, or write down everything that an employer has asked in your resume as long as you promise that you're going to do that before the interview. So do that and update your resume based on that and send it to. I'm 100% confident if you followed this approach and your LinkedIn is correct, you should be able to get an interview call. And once you get an interview call, make sure that you prepare the interviews um, questions in advance in terms of AKS, everything related to Kubernetes cluster and everything right from. And this is, I'm 100% confident if you do that and if you do mock interviews, this is 100% guaranteed you'll get a job as long as you follow what I'm asking you to do here as well. And that's exactly what guys like Joby, he moved from US to Australia, and then Australia is very, in terms of jobs, there are less jobs, and he was struggling to get interview calls. So we gave this whole framework to him, and this is with the right attitude, started getting back-to-back interviews, and now got a job. And now he's preparing for more and more advanced things, much higher paid jobs as well. Same thing as I mentioned at Fuyong. I'm not sure if I mentioned at the start, but received a job within 1 month. This is how totally new from Azure to changes to wanted to change the career to cloud program is great. And then I received a job after 1 month. And once you get a job, you can go become expert and learn all those things as well. So if you're interested with this three-step framework, we take you from not confident to apply, or no interview calls to multiple interview calls, or no job offer to multiple job offers. We give this whole three-step framework. Book a call with my team. Link should be in the description. On You have to select a date and time. That's a probably 45-minute discovery call to see whether you're right fit, we can help you or not. Make sure it's you answer these questions very, very diligently, because that's where we say that can you help or not. Also, there's a LinkedIn profile, very important. I want you to be LinkedIn profile. There's also a program. This program comes with a 6 months money back guarantee, which means we know that it's going to work, provided you do the work. So as long as you're ready to do the work, and you fill this form with LinkedIn profile and everything, but there's an investment required on this. This is not a free. And uh, so, so go through this, download this guide, and the next video I'm going to go and focus on these certifications. You'll see one by one these certifications coming up. Yeah. If you have any other question, if you have any feedback, anything I need to do, it's a bit lengthier video, but I wanted to give as much information and as educated decision for you to take. Let me know any feedbacks, and yeah, in the next video we're going to talk about the certification that's going to be here or here somewhere in YouTube, wherever it comes. And yeah, with that, this is Atul. Give me the feedback, whether genuine, uh, the constructive feedback, whether it's whether you like, not like, should I go higher, deeper, or any specific lab or project you want me to cover or about certification. Otherwise, I'll see you in this next video here. Take care and bye.